Hello, you guys, and welcome to my week 4 picks and thoughts video. We'll be going through these games in order. Obviously, I picked the Seahawks to win Thursday night, so we're not talking about that. And, we'll obviously be starting with Minnesota Vikings and the Pittsburgh Steelers playing in Dublin, Ireland. With that, let's get started. Both 2-1 teams. Obviously, the Steelers, in command of their own destiny, whether you'd like to think they look like a solid team. I do think that they got somewhat lucky against the Patriots last week, or maybe the defense is finally coming alive because they had a number of turnovers. The Vikings obviously started Carson Wentz last week, and he obviously dominated the Bengals. There's not much to be said. And their DV, Ivan Pace, had a hell of a game, having the highest defensive PFF grade of all time. Looking at this game, the things that I really, really notice and the things that I really, think are not good is, Van Ginkel is still out for the Vikings. He's very, very, very good. Donovan Jackson is out, and obviously Aaron Jones is on IR. Now, whether you think that you can keep it going on Minnesota with, your other running back, I'm trying to remember his name, remains to be seen. And I will say that this Pittsburgh Steelers defense has been rough against the run. And you look at, Alex Highsmith is out for them. And, that's their most notable injury. And then you have, Jalen Warren, Joey Porter Jr., and Jonnu Smith, all questionable, but expected to play. Now, looking at the matchup, we obviously have Carson Wentz starting a second game. And the thing that I wonder with him is, he didn't do anything crazy spectacular last week. He was more serviceable than McCarthy, of course, but in terms of crazy yardage or anything like that with the amount of points they scored, I don't think that that's going to be the case this week. You're obviously playing against Aaron Rodgers, who's not going to throw negligent, throws like last week, like Browning did on the Bengals. I think that Pittsburgh, while they've done some good things, just too much inconsistency on offense. I am going with the Vikings to win this. I think that they're just going to be able to apply too much pressure on Rodgers, who obviously isn't as mobile, is going to need to have a lot of trust as wide receiver. And with a run game that has yet to get going, I just don't see the way the Steelers win in this game. Now, if their defense comes together and can make Wentz look like kind of the Wentz that, fell apart, near his prime, then potentially, but I just don't think that, without Highsmith, I don't think you're going to have that perennial pass rush, and what you've looked like against the run, I think just isn't good. And Mason, the Vikings running back, has looked very good. I've liked what he's done. I think that he came in and he realized, hey, this is a place that I could be a starter for a long, long time, and he's playing with that extra juice. Being that they have obviously Aaron Jones, but he's injury prone and getting older. And, Mason, has a lot of good years left in front of him. So I think the Vikings win this game, despite, me being more than happy to see the Steelers win. And they improved to 3-1. Now we move on to Chargers and Giants. As we know, the headline of the week is that Jackson Dart is starting, and the Chargers defense has just been none to, be meddled with, if we're being honest, and that sort of thing. Herbert's playing like an MVP. I agree with it. Some of the throws he's made has been very good. The ironic thing about the Chargers is that their defense has been playing very well. Herbert's playing very well, but their run game has not been there. Marion Hampton, their leading rusher up to this point, with 142 yards over 3 games, off of 42 carries. That just isn't very much. We all know Najee Harris went out last week, and is on season-ending IR. And, looking at who they have injured on this team, obviously Mekhi Becton is out with a concussion, and Will Dissly is out with a knee injury. And then Darius Davis, a wide receiver, out as well. But other than that, I think that this team is really going to perform well against the Giants. And I think that, Herbert's going to be able to make this pass rush have to get to him, or he's going to dice them up all game. Thankfully, they did just play a hard game against Denver, which also has a very good pass rush. So, perhaps they're a little bit ready, and, Herbert's clock is going to be, up and that sort of thing. And I mean, you look at the Giants, they don't have any real super key injuries. I mean, I guess besides Tyrone Tracy. But the thing about that is that Scadaboo is playing, and I think he's running really, really hard and really, really strong. So I don't know if Tyrone Tracy is that huge of a blow to see what you have in Scadaboo. Their place kicker, Graham Gano, out is kind of interesting. Clearly he went in and he could play, and kick, but he's wincing in pain, and it didn't seem to really affect, I guess, their backup, who is kicking. But otherwise, looking at their injuries, the Giants don't really have that many. So, looking at this game, I kind of expect them to try and lean on the run, easily put Jackson Dart into good situations, and the Chargers are going to have to play sound. They're going to have to play sound football. And the one advantage, and I guess good thing about it being Dart's first start, is that it is at home. So he's not going to have that LA crowd just screaming at him the whole game if it had been played in SoFi. But obviously I'm picking the Chargers to win this, to improve to 4-0. I think that, they just, that there's just no way they drop this game after playing a close game against the Broncos last week that nearly got away from them. Moving on, we have Titans and Texans. So this game, to me, is very interesting. They give Houston a 7.5 point spread. I low-key don't trust, I don't trust the Texans. This is like a must-win game at home. But 7.5 point favorites. Why do I feel like that is kind of one of these, you're putting way too much props into how bad, the Tennessee has been. And last week, wasn't very good for them. Cam Ward had that really easy interception that was taken back, and their whole team was just derailed. And it's like looking, I guess, at the Texans, they have to pass the ball a lot, which to me just, doesn't bode well, because I think the strength of this Tennessee defense is their DB room. And, so they kind of have to throw it quite a bit. Tony Pollard, their leading rusher, does only have 197 yards through 3 games. That's obviously, like 63, 62 something a game, type of thing. That's not very good. Derek Stingley does have a questionable oblique injury. I feel like, that's not really going to affect, them and that sort of thing. And, it does kind of suck that I guess Jalen Smith is on IR, but overall, I do think that looking at these teams, you've got the Titans, who it's like could make a statement win here in their second road game of the year. But I think that, the Texans are going to come out on top. I just don't think they fall to 0-4. And I think that Cam Ward, is going to have a tough time with this defense and is going to get a lot of pressure in his face. See, I'm rolling with the Texans. Oh my goodness, sorry. To win this, division rival game, because falling to 0-4 and doing it against a division rival just would be nuts to me. But moving on, we have Commanders and Falcons. The Falcons have been to me just really disappointing. They win against the Vikings, who at this point proved that JJ McCarthy was maybe inept and that sort of thing. And just overall, I just don't see Jaden Daniels really muffing it against the Falcons in this early game. So I'm picking them. And I mean, looking at Penix, he is, I guess, he is going to start this game, but last week was very, very rough. I think that growing pains are kind of normal when it's your first full season starting type of thing. But then I also think about how last week it's like they played the Panthers and they didn't play well at all, and they just couldn't finish drives type of thing. AJ Terrell is out, which is another reason why I'm kind of like, I think that, hey, you really don't have that really, really good wide receiver, or that really good cornerback to cover like Scary Terry, Deebo Samuel, and that sort of thing. And just overall, to me, a team that like Washington can really chip underneath type of thing, and then when the opportunity presents itself, go deep. And AJ Terrell was their best deterrent for that. So yeah, I'm going with the Commanders in this game, and I expect them to kind of soundly win, despite Atlanta having 1.5 point odds. The next game we have is Saints versus Bills. The Saints last week, as we know, just didn't play very well, and they got handled by Seattle, who obviously kind of proved that, Sam Darnold is pretty legit after Thursday night and playing a better defense, and then they play the Bills. I don't know how it's not like a 99.9% like prediction for the Bills to win this game, and I don't think I'm really going to talk about very much. Just for you guys, I'm gonna tell you that the Buffalo Bills are favored by 14.5 points, and the just overall, even though Spencer Rattler I don't think has played terribly, I just think that the defense really isn't there for the Saints yet, and there's no way this is the game that's a coming out game for them. And maybe the Buffalo Bills on defense can get some confidence. And I guess, looking at kind of the injuries on the Saints, Chase Young is out. Not good when you need pressure on Allen. And then Raduns, their tackle, is also out. So, not very good. It's a good game for Ed Oliver to be out, in my opinion, and same with Matt Milano, but I think this defense is going to perform well regardless. Now moving up to a very interesting game, we have Eagles and Buccaneers, a revenge game from last year that is in Tampa Bay. I think that the Buccaneers obviously could have very well been like 1-2 or 2-1. Or 0-3, having won all their games off of last-second field goals, and Philadelphia is 3.5 point favorites in this game. But to me, I really think about the lack of, passing on this team, and I think about the sound play of, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, where they've just been very, very good, and, Emeka Egbuka being very, very good as well, this year, for them, the rookie, obviously. I would like to see a little bit more from the running game, even though they're obviously split carries type of thing. I think that it's one of those that it's really only popped late in games. And I think it's probably one of their issues with being able to essentially drain these clocks and these other teams stay around. Type of thing. But if you can get ahead against this team, I think that your defensive front, like led by Vita Vea, is going to be able to really stuff Saquon Barkley, who hasn't been having the season that we would expect with only 194 yards up to this point and being the workhorse back and nobody else really getting that many carries, you guys, on this team. Looking at this game, I guess, I don't know if they did. I think that they said that Godwin and Wirfs are back. That'll really, really help, type of things. Mike Evans is out, so needing Godwin back would be very, very good. But I don't think the Buccaneers, I think with the way that Baker is playing and how he's become more accurate, the first couple of weeks I was kind of like, oh, some of these throws are just like out of sync and off target. But in any case, I think that Baker's played very well. He is questionable. If he didn't play, then yeah, it's an easy wash for the Eagles. But I think you look at this game and you think with the Eagles, the thing that I'll say about them is, yeah, they're very, very talented and they can pull games like they did last week against the Rams with just ridiculous end of game play. But that just to me isn't sustainable. And like I've said before, their passing game is really lackluster. It's not good that their rushing attack is not as good as it was last year. So it's like it's going to get very hard for them to keep riding on wins this, like the way they have with lack of yards and, obviously good defensive play. But overall, it's like they've been in close games with, teams, like the Chiefs is the game that I think about that. Yeah, it's a game you're playing. It's a game you're playing that's like a repeat of the Super Bowl, and the Chiefs played them tough. But in any case, they have way less talent. And, they were still able to play them tough with minimal mistakes. Now, I do think there's a world that maybe, Baker doesn't play as well as he has been or been as clutch as he has been, and that sort of thing. But I am picking the Buccaneers to upset the Eagles here to really have a statement win, and be able to play very, very well. And I think it's just a very good boon that Wirfs and Godwin are back for this game. Moving on, we have Browns-Lions. The Browns obviously beating my Packers last week. The defense and special teams ultimately winning that game 13-10. And looking at the Lions, many people are saying that, hey, they're back. They're really, really good. Oh, this and that sort of thing. But the problem that I really have with the Lions and the reason why I'm not just going to sing home about them is that they obviously lost to my Packers week 1. The Packers dominant victory, really only gave up 1 TD in garbage time. And then they played the Bears the week after, which I think, the Bears have really proven that they just don't really have that good of a defense. And you think about them playing the Cowboys. Well, they lost CeeDee Lamb early. And, I think that, whenever you lose a guy like that in game and you didn't expect him to be out for the majority of the game, it really affects your game plan. And you looked rough on Dallas last week. And then on Monday night, yes, they beat the Ravens. But the thing that I like to think about with this game is that Van de Beek did not play. And then you also had Van Noy that didn't play. And that unit is one of the best units at being able to really stop the run. You can't just do it with Roquan Smith and, some of these other guys that are, makeshift on the line, essentially. So the fact that, they put up 38 points, but the Ravens weren't able to really stop the run, super, super well and that sort of thing. So overall, I just think that we really need to see this Lions team perform against a good defense, and they may very well, smoke the Browns this week and then say, hey, we aren't threatened by this defense. But I do think the Browns have the best defense, potentially, besides the Packers, that the Lions will have played, through 4 weeks. So thinking about this game, I do think Detroit wins. Like, I'm not saying that I don't think they win. It's at home. And Cleveland is away, so they don't have the noise and that sort of thing. But I think they have a better defense than what is, they're credited for. And it isn't like they haven't had, guys really stepping up in their own right on their team that are young players. Like I'm thinking of their leading receivers, Harold Fanning at this point, Schlesinger, their lead tackler, who's obviously proven to be very, very good. Judkins, I think, is kind of he's a running back on the rise, if I'm being honest with you. And while Flacco has 2 TDs to 4 picks, I think that's more on his wide receivers and their ability, than on this thing. But the other thing that I think about that I like to point out on the Lions is that they have not had very good secondary play in their DBs. Like, I think Terrion Arnold has just looked terrible, no pun intended. I think that I don't know. He's just not playing at a good NFL level. And, Reed has been your best, but he's a slot guy. So, going outside and, big arm Flacco, I think that, they could potentially expose these guys. But, we'll see. If the Lions have another dominant victory, it does kind of further solidify that they're back, but we'll really, really, really see, I guess, as the season go on. It's one of those that I think it's too early to tell who's the best. And there is like no real juggernaut as far as I'm concerned, in the league. And, we'll see with this game. I think that, I guess another thing that I don't really like is Taylor Decker has a shoulder injury. That definitely doesn't help them. Their starting tackle, against this pass rush that just, everyone leeches off of Garrett. But yeah, I am picking the Lions, of course, because I'm not a fool. I'm not saying some crazy, loss by the Lions by any means. But I think that, we have to be realistic about who they've played, the personnel they didn't have, and whether they were full strength and whether they've even been good. And I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think the Ravens defense has been very good this year. If they were, it would have been easy to close week 1 against the Bills. And, they wouldn't have had to rely on even the Browns imploding on them, to give them an easy win, in week 2. And, the Ravens, and then they play, the Lions, who they just can't stop the run against. Well, it's kind of the same old Lions against a debilitated Ravens team. So I'm not really willing to give them, omega props that like, hey, this team handled them. They did, still beat them pretty well and do a good job against Lamar Jackson. But, we'll see, when they play some, real defenses that are not just letting you do whatever you want. But moving on, we have Panthers-Patriots. The Panthers, obviously, with a big win last week against the Falcons, a game that everyone's like, oh, there's no way they're going to win, myself included. The Patriots losing last week and having their only win of the year on the road. So looking at this, I'm curious to see like who commits fewer mistakes. I think when you have Bryce Young and then you have, Drake May, who it's not like he's made crazy mistakes or anything like that. I just think that, looking at this game, it's really going to come down to that. And I expect Vrabel to make it very hard on Bryce Young. Now, I will say this. I think that the rushing attack of the Patriots just needs to be better. The fact that Drake May is their leading rusher just is not a good sign when you're supposed to be a defensive scheme with Vrabel and, be able to train the clock. And, Hunter Henry, your leading receiver, is good, but, I'd expect a little bit more out of Stephon Diggs, if I'm being honest with you. So kind of looking at this, and it's, the Panthers haven't really been able to get that much pressure either, with their leading sack guy being Princely, who got drafted, this year, and he has 1 sack. So looking at, this game, overall, I think that the Panthers, have the upper leg. I'm a little bit of a believer in them, despite New England being favorites, just because I think they have a little bit more offensive talent. They're performing a little bit better offensively. And, I think they do have, a pretty good secondary that's performing better than last year, which, don't get me wrong, isn't anything crazy to gawk about, because they didn't play good, for their secondary last year. It was very, very bad. But I am taking the Panthers to win this game. I think the Patriots are going to take some time to figure things out, and it's easier to prepare for a team that can't run the ball. And you do have good run defenders, so I don't think the Patriots are going to get their run game going in this, this week. But I'm going with the Panthers, as an underdog pick this week, and we'll move on to Jaguars and 49ers. The 49ers, obviously winning a close game against the Cardinals last week, where the Cardinals to me, they just kind of blew the game away. And overall, I just, the Niners, they have McCaffrey. Brock Purdy is playing this week, but they're only favored by, 3.5 points. The Jaguars won last week, but it was a 17-10 game, if I remember correctly, and it doesn't instill confidence in me. And I think, looking at this game, for the Niners, Nick Bosa obviously being out is very, very bad. That's not good at all. And then you think about, but you have Jennings coming back to play. I think that is huge. You're going to need all the offensive talent you need and the familiarity and that sort of thing. So looking at, and obviously you have another wide receiver in Jordan Watkins is out with a calf injury. So it's going to be an interesting game to come back to, but overall, I do think the Niners they're going to win this game. I just don't trust the consistency of the Jaguars yet, even though they're 2-1, and especially going to San Fran, who, don't get me wrong, it hasn't been the prettiest season, but they've been coming out and finishing games strong, which I can't, when they've been coming in out and doing that against a team like Jacksonville that, last year just tend to throw games away or just not look good after halftime. That's just the way that I'm kind of leaning this week. Don't get me wrong, I think Jacksonville could win, but overall, I just think they haven't been what, you would kind of expect this year. So I'm going with San Fran to win over Jacksonville. Moving on, Colts Rams. The hardest test for the Colts, so far. The Rams obviously having a heartbreaking loss where they could have really solidified that maybe they're the best team in the NFC and that sort of thing. Obviously, the Colts played the Dolphins, the Broncos, and then the Titans, narrowly obviously beating the Broncos by, because of a leverage penalty. And then last week, really taking care of business against the Titans. This week is at the Rams, which I'm kind of like, well, goodness. The Rams are, tough cookies. And to go and have to play there across the country, essentially, is not going to be an easy task. Daniel Jones does seem like he's reinvigorated type of thing. Jonathan Taylor has been doing very, very well. But we do know last week that, hey, they were stopping Saquon. So Jonathan Taylor, while he's been having a very good season, he's going to have to really be able to pound it this week to take the pressure off of Jones, who, has Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs and Adonai Mitchell as his, three guys, with Alec Pierce being out, but hopefully, maybe Tyler Warren, starts to really pop off or something like that. I think it is only a matter of time for him, but looking at this game, it's hard for me. It's hard for me to pick against the Rams, if I'm being honest with you. I kind of wanted to go and lean into Indianapolis, but the Rams have to be very, very peeved at the way they lost last week. And you can't tell me that Daniel Jones and the rest of his team are going to be ready for the buzzsaw that is the Rams. And I think of the Rams defense, obviously they have Fisk, they have Verse, Kobe Durant, and a lot of these kind of scrappier guys, which I think are just going to get in the face of the Colts wide receivers. And I think it's going to be very, very frustrating for them. So with that being said, I do just think, I think that it's going to be a tough game, and I mean, you obviously have, Puka and Devontae. I'm just wondering how they're going to hold up, defensively against these guys, who did pretty well against, what could argue is a better defense than, the Colts is on the Eagles. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Rams to win this game, and the Colts, trust me, it'll probably be a gritty and feisty game, but it's going to be really, really tough. And I think the one advantage I guess I would give the Colts is that maybe Daniel Jones has to run it a lot this game, with his legs. And overall, that would be, something that, that could affect this game, as, Daniel Jones has way more mobility than Stafford. But yeah, I'm picking the Rams, expect a kind of gritty game. Moving to Ravens and Chiefs. I'm surprised, at this, in the sense of like who these teams were last year, of course. But the Chiefs, I kind of expected maybe a lackluster start, in all honesty, with the suspensions and them getting older and that sort of thing, and overall, just to me, kind of like a lack of, additions to the team and the injuries that have happened. The Ravens, I expected to be a lot better. Don't get me wrong, I think Lamar Jackson's performing very, very well. I think that he, along with Josh Allen, and then, along with Josh Allen and then Herbert, are just playing, the best football in the league right now. Derrick Henry, 2 costly fumbles. It really sucks. I know that he's probably going to be running angry at this team. And overall, I think, the Chiefs are, better equipped to handle, the run game than they are the passing game. I think that they just overall, you got McDuffie, but you kind of have a defense that just, to me, hasn't been getting after, and playing crazy good coverage. And I think, the loss of Reed, I don't think helps, because that guy was a blazer and he made sure that, none of these teams could throw deep, and that sort of thing. But overall, I'm going to go with the Ravens to win this game. I think they have the better team. I think they're a little bit peeved at the way they've started, the way that they've let games, get out away from them. Mandabik is still out with his neck injury, which sucks, and same with Broderick Washington and other D tackles, so they're shallow on there. Van Noy is questionable this week. I expect him to play and be a difference maker. But overall, the pass rush of this team has made it very hard, for me to say that they're going to stop any offense, in terms of the passing attack. And it's like, while we've kind of seen a lackluster passing attack from Mahomes, he still has 669 yards through 3 weeks with a lackluster passing attack. So overall, I do think that, they're better equipped, to lose this game, I guess, because of the lack of ability in their run game and that sort of thing, and not having like a super prolific passing attack. So I'm picking the Ravens on this game, as they are 2.5-point favorites, I guess, but could go either way. Moving on, we have Bears Raiders. The Bears winning last week and beating the Cowboys, and that sort of thing. I do actually think that, it helps when your guys are wide open. It helps when the Cowboys have the best, or I mean, the best at giving up big plays, meaning the worst, you guys, at balls thrown 20 plus yards. And overall, to me, it's interesting with the Raiders because Geno has 831 passing yards, and we've always known he has the ability to pass for a lot of yards, but he has 4 picks, which have been very costly. And then you think about their run game and Gene not popping off yet. Not a good thing, especially to me against a Bears defense that, is I think unproven against the run, as they were bad against it last year. And we'll really see once they actually play a team, that can run the football, because the Cowboys don't run it very well. The Lions obviously didn't need to run it to beat them. And the Vikings in week 1, bad JJ McCarthy that they happened to lose because, the defense really squared up and did very, very well. Now, I'm picking the Bears to my dismay because, I think that they just have more talent. I think the Raiders, the problem with them, in my opinion, is that you look at their team and, Gene T hasn't popped off. I do like their wide receiver core. I think it's very solid and underrated and young. Myers, Tucker, and then Dante Thorne Jr., who's just a blazer and a size. Obviously, we don't need to talk about Brock Bowers. He's amazing. But Michael Mayer being out kind of sucks, type of thing. But we kind of look at, their defense, and I think to myself, makeshift corners, Jeremy Chin, probably the most proven guy on here, potentially. And it's like they've only got a couple injuries. So it's like Max Crosby playing at full strength. He's going to have a hell of a game pressuring Caleb, because Caleb has not been good against pressure. And it's like, obviously, the Cowboys last week did not force pressure, having probably one of the weakest pass rushes in the league. So the Raiders, to me, they could win, potentially, if they cut back on the mistakes. They actually, can establish a run game. And I think they have, a quarterback that, even though, it doesn't always look pretty, will put up yards. So I'm picking the Bears because, if they do, if that boost of confidence kind of propels them into a win, I could see it, but only time will tell. And I think it could be a very, very close game with, the Bears, for whatever reason, are 1.5 point underdogs and the Raiders are 1.5 point favorites. I'm kind of thinking to myself, we'll see. But moving on, we have Sunday night, Packers Cowboys. Obviously, my Packers had a disappointing loss last Sunday where we were up 10-0, with a few minutes left or whatever it was, and penalties and all those sorts of things, just doomed the Packers. It made it very hard against a very good defense where it's like you've got a good pass rush, you got numerous guys that can pass rush, where you have to deal with it. And the O-line was really banged up. My Packers O-line, just not where it needs to be at this point, And overall, the running game has been considerably weaker, obviously, than last year, where Jacobs ran for 1,300, and then the 2 guys backing him up had each over 500 yards. Tucker Kraft really needs to have a good game. He kind of disappeared against the Browns, if I'm being honest with you, as the leading wide receiver. Rashawn Gary has been doing very, very well, this year, being the league's leader in sacks at 4.5, and benefiting off of, the addition of Micah Parsons, obviously. But you look at this team, Anthony Belton out, the guy we drafted in the 2nd round. Aaron Banks is doubtful with a groin injury. Zach Tom, they have ruled out, I'm assuming, just because the bye week for the Packers is week 5 after this week. You have Javon Bullard, who had been playing pretty well in concussion protocol. So a lot of injuries. Obviously, most notably, though, to me in this game, is you have Tyler Booker, the star guard for the Cowboys, one of the best guards in the league, out with an ankle injury. CeeDee Lamb, as we know, out with an ankle injury. And you have a center, your center Cooper Beebe, who played last year, is out, and I know it hasn't really like crazily affected, but I think the lack of experience just hasn't helped the run game. So looking at the injury report, I feel a lot better with who the Cowboys have injured and not playing. So I think that the Packers, I think they can really dominate this game. I think that they can go out and they can get after Dak. And I guess, I don't think I need to mention, you probably heard this a lot, but I do think that Micah Parsons is really going to stick it to him. And he's really going to get after these guys. And with a line that's like makeshift and, hasn't played together type of thing, expect some disruption. And with Gary playing very, very well. And it's like, don't get me wrong, I think Dak has been playing pretty good this year. But last week when CeeDee went out, he looked very, very bad against a defense that hasn't had good DB play, in the Bears. So we'll really see. I think my Packers are going to really blow out, the Cowboys, if I'm being honest with you, even though it's in Dallas, and to really kind of be like, hey, let's bounce back. Let's go into the bye week strong, get healthy, and, make this push, to win a lot of games later in the season, because it doesn't get easier for the Packers. And this is a game that I think, hey, you need to shine and really give the team a good feeling going into the bye week. So I'm picking the Packers, of course, and now we move on to the doubleheader and Monday night. So first game is a doozy. It's Jets-Dolphins. I do know that Fields is playing, and this is one of those games to me that it's a division game. The Jets have been close in most of these games, that they've had this year. Where, I guess besides week 2, I guess, against a good team. But, they put up a good amount of points against the Buccaneers. They put up a good amount of points against Steelers, in week 1. And now they play the Dolphins, who really don't have that great of a defense. So I look at the Jets and I look at Braylon Allen, Breece Hall, hopefully able to be very, very good and, do some things. I think that Fields is going to come back and he's going to be able to really, really expose this Dolphins defense. So I am picking them to win. The Dolphins, it was interesting. They had a little bit of a flare up against, the Bills last week. Does that mean that they're going to do very well? I think that Tua is still way too limited. I think the defense for the Jets is going to be able to really shine in this game. And I just don't understand how they are saying that, hey, the Jets are underdogs in this game by 2.5 points. So, yeah, I'm picking the Jets, despite nobody apparently having confidence in them. And I think that, this is a game that they can get away with and, do very, very well for themselves and instill confidence in their team. But moving on to the second Monday night game, kind of another doozy in the sense that, the Bengals don't look like they're going to be a playoff team, in all honesty, and Denver probably not happy that they've dropped 2 of their last games against playoff teams. And obviously, they gave the Colts one of them, due to a really bad penalty that you shouldn't have committed. And then you lose to the Chargers, who, man, gut-wrenching when you looked like you had all the momentum near the end of the game. But for this game, I am just going to leave it at that. I'm picking the Broncos. I don't think that they lose at home, primetime, Monday night, against the Bengals, where, they haven't traded for a quarterback. And I think it's just nuts to think about that Browning can go in, play against this defense, and dominate him the way that Herbert, was at various points the previous week. Where it's like, do you think he's going to have that kind of game? No, I don't think so. But that's really going to conclude this one, you guys. Sorry it kind of dragged on a little bit. I really wanted to talk in depth about these teams, but if you have any questions or, opinions, please leave them in the comments, about any of these games. I would very much appreciate it. And leave a subscribe if you want content like at least 2 times a week. And, insight into what I really think is going on with these teams. Because I do wear my heart on my sleeve with these things. And I'm not just trying to, hate on the NFC North teams, either. Even though it's like I don't like the Lions, Bears, or, or the Vikings really, to any extent. But, we'll see, we'll see with these, plethora of Sunday games, really what goes on and, how the league develops. But I want to thank you all for watching. And as always, go Pack, go.